Okay, hello and welcome to today's event, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Jason Gilbert from MSDynamicsWorld.com, and we're here for a new session looking at going live on the new AX on Azure. Joining us to talk about it today is Charles Head. He leads services delivery for IBIS, a Sonata software company. As we get started, please know that you can add your feedback and ask questions during the Q&A block, using the Q&A block that you should see on the right side of the webcast session here. We also wanted to just start with a very brief poll to learn a little bit more about you in the audience. So feel free to just take a moment to let us know kind of what your interest in AX7 is for today. And without further delay, please allow me to welcome Charles Head to get things started.
Hello. As Jason mentioned, my name is Charles Head. Quick background about me so you know why I'm doing this. I am, as he mentioned, the head of services delivery for IBIS. So we have the implementation teams, help desk support, network infrastructure groups that are involved in Project AX and CRM implementations report to me. And we recently went through an AX7 implementation with a client in the TAP program, and it was quite the experience. So I was asked to share knowledge about AX7 and the implementation process with you guys, and it seems like a good topic, so we'll keep moving forward with that. First off, a little quick about IBIS. We're a CRM and AX Microsoft partner, or a gold certified partner. We've been around since 1989. We started as a GP practice, and in the early 2000s moved into AX and CRM. We were purchased earlier this year by the Sonata software firm, primarily for, well, several reasons, but we have a lot of experience in doing implementations in the U.S. We have a lot of functional consultants experienced in several specific areas, distribution, the CPG, et cetera. And Sonata has a lot of experience in the retail industry. So it seemed to them made a good fit. These are very rapid growing areas in the AX marketplace. We also provide them a North American direct presence for help desk support and services and knowledge. And we found that Sonata to be a great company for us to merge with, because they have a 12-year history with Microsoft R&D. They have a lot of the programmers who developed not only LCS, but a lot of the CRM and AX toolkits, such as the import-export frameworks, the data migration tools. So we get to rely on their expertise in the fundamentals of AX and how it's built and the tools around it. And it tends to make for a good partnership when we're doing implementations. Certainly very helpful on these, I don't want to call them bleeding edge because they're not anymore, but the technologically forward products such as the new AX in the cloud. So that's enough of the sales pitch. I'll move on to why we're here. To tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So first is, who is Mansfield, so you'll understand the scale and the scope of the project, to give you kind of a framework as to what we were doing and why we were doing it and what it meant to them. Then we're going to talk about specifics in AX7, some the Azure environment, the development environments, the LCS, the tools and tricks you have to use, and we'll talk about data migration and configuration to some degree. Then we're going to talk about how Azure and how you live with it and what it means and where it impacts you. Also, that I can do a final wrap-up of how that impacts an implementation project for AX7, especially as it relates to a prior version of, I'm going to continue calling it AX7 accidentally, even though I think it's now called Dynamics 365 for Operations, or sometimes called the new AX. So if I say AX7, or I say the new AX, or I say Dynamics 365 for Operations, just please bear with me. Microsoft has rebranded the product on me twice in the last couple of months. So we're going to talk at the very end about the implementation process and how these new tools and the new environment impact either by making it faster and cheaper, or slower and harder as we get to the end. So the first point is to give you a lot of background information. Some of this is very technical, some of it's not. If it gets a little technical for you, that's okay. Just hang on through that, and we'll get back to topics that are more focused on how it impacts the implementation and the processes. So to start with, Mansfield is the company we did the implementation for. They are an energy logistics firm. They're about $8.5 billion. They're based out of Gainesville, which is in about an hour north of Atlanta, which is where our home office is. They own multiple companies, and they operate primarily in North America, but they have some facilities in South America and Asia. They have their primary business is transporting fuel from like ports to big tank farms. They then transport that fuel through gas and rail, through rail lines and tanker trucks and stuff to individual facilities, whether for gas stations or more commonly to like large distribution centers for, say, packaged goods distributors or mail carriers or government entities where they have central locations where their cars and trucks are refueled. They also own a utility company that sells natural gas and electricity to commercial entities around the U.S. They have some green energy companies that they own, and they do an awful lot of contract and trading on the stock market to try to set prices and keep their prices stable for their company, so they have known prices going out. So they have a lot of transactions processed through the system. They were interested in the finance, the AR, AP, GL, fixed assets, budgets. So the scope was fairly specific, and not a lot of users. There's the 100 to 170 range. I think around 150 all totaled, and that's not a lot of load for an AX implementation, but they do have a lot of transactions. They process on the order of 50,000 transactions a week through 12 entities or legal entities or companies. And they've got 36 bank account integrations that have to go on, and a lot of transactions coming in and going out all day long. So when they approached us that they were interested in the new AX, we brought them to Microsoft as a classic example of a TAP company. They have a very sophisticated IT infrastructure. They're used to doing large project implementations. They have an IT department that knows how to do ADFS integration. They already have EA agreements. They already had Azure subscriptions that they were deployed on. They were already fully implemented in Office 365. They had a well-defined scope, a limited number of users, and they were a classic case for a TAP program customer. So in August of last year, Microsoft accepted them into the Technology Adoption Program. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, when Microsoft has these large software offerings, they don't go straight to the public. They prefer that they select customers and partners, and they run them through these TAP programs to make sure that they've worked out all of the majority of the issues before they create the release to world version. So Mansfield was a classic case of a company that would fit a profile that they would like to do that with. So in August, they accepted us. We started the implementation in September, and we went live May 1. So along the way, we had multiple versions of the product. CTP6, CTP7, CTP8 were provided to us, so blowing away environments, rebuilding environments. And Mansfield was a wonderful partner to work with. They were very good about socializing the project timeline and holding people accountable for training tasks and testing tasks. Their IT department took responsibility for integration with Azure and the operations systems side of all of our integration activities. Worked as a team, which is very important. So everybody on the team had regular status meetings and had deliverables on one consolidated project plan. So there's enough about Mansfield. I'll tell you, they were a great company to work with, and they certainly held up their side of the partnership relationship when doing an implementation. So we're going to talk quickly about some points about an AX, a new AX deployment. First, it's cloud model. It's software as a service. And everybody has their own opinion of what cloud means. I'll tell you from the simplest point of view, from my mind, what it means is you don't have servers, host servers in your on-prem environment. They're hosted somewhere, and typically your client is a browser. So it's not dependent upon a particular browser. You should be able to use any one of a number of browsers as long as they're compliant with the base HTML5. and you may or may not have to load some specific toolkits into it, but you should be able to use a browser to access a server that's hosted on some platform that's not on-prem. Right, so that's the basic concept behind the new interface to the new AX. They also they did some major changes to how the development occurs in the new AX. X++, still the same X++ as always, but it was ported to Visual Studio. That means we can now use the debugger to step through code. We're now deploying projects as packages that are fully compiled into DLLs. So instead of using pseudo-interpretive code the way the X++ used to run, it is now fully compiled, runs quite a bit faster, tends to be more stable. The AOT is now displayed in Visual Studio through the Application Explorer. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. And instead of using the old model of layers where there was a Microsoft layer, an ISV layer, a CUS layer, and a user layer, now when you make customizations, they want you to create your own projects and what they refer to as extending the existing objects. So I may add a menu into the delivered Microsoft code to call my new form, but my new form should be in its own project. It should be compilable and deployable as a DLL on its own. The purpose of that is to make applying hotfixes, cumulative updates, and upgrades much easier. There should be fewer intersection points whenever Microsoft has to release a hotfix. We have found that to be true as long as you're careful to extend objects in the methodology that Microsoft recommends. Now you're deploying to production through LCS, and the methodology for doing deployments is structured. And as long as you follow a good change management process, deploying through LCS becomes, I won't say easy. You do have to know what you're doing, but it's certainly more relaxing from a project management point of view because the possibility for errors have been dramatically reduced. The next point here, VMs, because it's cloud-based, everything's hosted in Azure, and what's going to happen is the servers are deployed as virtual machines, so I can log into a development VM, and if it's a single box VM, I will have the SQL Server and Visual Studio and SSRS and IS7 are all running on that machine. So I can use SQL Server Management Studio to go in and run queries. I can flip into the Visual Studio, check code in and out of a TFS library, make my modifications, test them, debug my code. And finally, you have to have an ADFS integration. So you need to learn how that works and make sure your IT department is up to speed on that so that when our users are authenticated to your local domain, they can pull up their browser and go to the AX link and not have to re-authenticate. It also means you'll be able to print to local printers, email through Office 365, copy files up and down through various tools from your local file shares, file servers, up to the Azure file system. So those all obviously have an impact on our project as we try to go through a deployment. This is some graphic stuff. It's a PowerPoint, so we like graphic stuff. Put a few on here. I will mention that from an architecture standpoint, the main thing to remember is that the SQL Server is still providing your database hosting. You're still using SSRS for most of your delivered reports. Management Reporter is still there. It's still the same. It still mines the data. The data looks the same as it always did. The data structures haven't really changed. On top of that is an AOS, but the AOS is not providing code interpretation anymore. It's primarily pulling in data from data entities from the database and serving them up to the client on the HTML. You've also added the IS7 web host layer. So your AOS is this user interaction layer, data endpoints, and forms engine, but it's all being serviced out to the client through IS7, and then of course your client's in a browser. But you do still have an AOS, you do still have a layer that's doing all the data interpretation and your data is still stored in SQL Server. I put a picture up here of the AOT now in Visual Studio. Hopefully everybody can see that. I know some people's screens might be a little small, but if I look in the Application Explorer in Visual Studio, I can still see all the traditional objects, the tables, queries, code classes. And if I were to drill into the code, I would see it's X++ code just like it used to be. I think Microsoft was very smart when they decided to deploy AX in the cloud. They chose not to add or remove functionality. I believe they deprecated a few items like the positive pay. I believe they wanted to get out of the integration business and let the end user and the partners handle that with the banks and such. But in most cases, all the functionality came over the same as it was in AX 2012 R3. So the WMS, enhanced WMS, is still the same. The features are the same. What looks different is the UI. It's browser-based, so there are some implications there, especially in terms of locking data, so two people can get to the same record at the same time. The client is dissociated from the SQL server. So unlike on a thick client running on a terminal server or your desktop, when you edit a record, it places a direct lock onto the table and record impacted. When you have a browser-based client, there is no lock on the database. It pulled the data back into a data set and pushed that out to the client. So if you save your data in AX7, somebody else might have updated the data before you got to it. First one wins, and a notice will be sent back to the user that the data had been updated and they need to pull a new set. It sounds like a bad thing, but I think Microsoft has done a very good job of how they implemented this. We're not actually running into many problems with it. Matter of fact, I'm not hearing any problems from the users. The users learn to be careful and not all try to edit the same data at the same time. And it is pretty good about telling you when somebody else has a record locked. By pretty good, I mean it always tells you if somebody else is editing a record, so you know not to edit it first. It will still let you pull up the data, and you can think you're editing it, and then you can try to submit it, and it's not going to go in. But as long as you're paying attention to your warnings and your processes are under control, so two people aren't trying to put the same payable in at the same time, then we are not running into problems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about LCS now. In the past with AX 2012, you could use LCS, but you didn't have to. Had some good tools for error reporting. You tend to get a priority when you submit your tickets through LCS that you don't get if you just try to email them in or call them in. The business process modeler was there. There's a lot of tools in there for storing documents to share across the team. But in AX, the new AX, you have to use LCS. It's required to do your deployments. So when you create an LCS project, the first thing to know is the client owns the project. The partner is given access to it, so you have to name your partner or digital partner of record when you're creating your LCS environment. And it's expected that that partner will then handle the initial security as you go through your implementation project and you learn the things you need to learn to manage LCS. The partner should be experienced at LCS and should know how to add users and remove users and add documents and deploy environments. The fundamental reason for using LCS is all of the deployments to Azure are done through LCS, and they're typically templated. And when you start your LCS, you're going to have to fill out a usage profiler. It's primarily used for your production environments, but it tells Microsoft how many users, how many modules, what your transaction volumes are like, and what types of deployments, like disaster recovery options, do you want? Do you want geographically dispersed host sites? And if you have development environments, do you need, giant host D3 boxes, or is it D1 okay? So that's something you work out with your partner or with Microsoft on your EA agreement as to what size boxes you need when you deploy. But Microsoft will make the final decision on a production high availability environment based on your usage profile and what they've learned about your product as it's deployed when they build the production environments. But all of it is template based. So you're going to say, I want to deploy a dev environment, and you're going to push the button, and essentially you can push the button, fill in what type of environment you're going to put in an Azure subscription ID if it's a development or test environment, because those are going to go on your Azure subscription. You have to take that So you're going to provide an Azure ID to LCS. It's going to give you a key. You're going to give that key to your Azure management team. They're going to stick it in, and they're going to get back another key. And you come back to LCS, and you need to plug that in. So if everyone communicates well, this shouldn't take 5 minutes. If everyone's not communicating well, it might take you a day or two to get all that process done. So understand up front that your Azure management team has got to be part of the deployment process and know what you're doing and be familiar with how many environments you're going to deploy and how you expect to use them and how long you wish to retain them. So when I get through that process, I get my key back, I put it in LCS, and I hit the deploy button. The dev environments typically take 3 to 4 hours to deploy. So we usually would say we want to create them, and we push the button and we go to dinner. And if it was real critical, we'd come back from dinner and we'd start working again 3 hours later. If it's not critical, we just come in the next morning and pick up from there. But those development or test or high availability environments, when they're deployed, they're fully deployed. SQL's installed, SSRS is installed, IS7's installed, Visual Studio's installed, everything is hooked up, the initial security is put in, and you're good to go. You can connect to the VM through an RDP client, bring up Visual Studio, you can bring up AX immediately and use AX if you want. Typically, you can update your template with your latest code base. So if I had to deploy a new dev environment, it gets deployed with my latest accepted code base, and I can provide, say, if I want data from a production backup that Microsoft provides me, and so I can blow out my new dev environment fully ready for the developer to come in and start working the next morning. It saves a lot of stress and a lot of time on building environments. The old 2012 environment, we could typically expect to spend upwards of a week fully deploying and configuring dev environments, unless you're very structured and controlled and used to using VMs to take ghosts and redeploy them and then apply all of your packages and the correct layers and apply all your security and get your SSRS running and get everything connected to the correct email servers and print servers. I'm sure those people who've been through it before know that can be painful. This is amazing. You push the button, you go away, you come back 3 hours later, and your environment's up and running. Nothing about LCS to point out is this little button right here. I'll see if I can get my little arrow to work. That guy, Business Process Modeler. Could use it before in AX 2012. And the new AX, it's pretty important. If you wish to use the task recorder for online interactive help that's aware of where you are in the application, then you had to have used this to define your processes. But we encourage people to do it anyway because the tool is very useful during the analysis phase of the project in doing fit gap analysis. You get a basic library of business process models from Microsoft. You will tend to want to fill them all. It's not going to be anywhere near all of them. So for example, the process of cutting a check, you go into a certain form, you hit a couple of buttons, you fill in some information, you say, I'm going to use this bank account and I want to check and push. And when you go through that process, you actually go through it in AX, and the business process model records each task. Now, where your process differs from the delivered AX process, you can identify that as a gap. And the business process modeler will dump out a list of gaps that you can then manage to. It also creates kind of a Visio-looking diagram, which you can dump to Word and use in training diagram, using your training preparation. This is very useful for training plan development, for test plan development, and using those gaps when you develop your solution design as part of your design phase. So all of the basic processes plus the gaps are thrown together in one big list that you can then work down and decide, is it critical, is it not critical, how much should it cost, how am I going to develop it, and all those typical decision factors that go in design. It gives you a framework in which to do all of that. Another interesting point is the error reporting. Microsoft wants you to do all of your ticket submissions through LCS. It gives them a place to look at your deployment and look at the environment that you're deployed in, where you can upload data files to them, you can upload code to them, and they can communicate back and forth in a structured manner for you. The environment monitoring is done through LCS now, so if you deploy 3 3 dev environments, a couple test environments, a high availability test, and a prod. You can go in one place and look and see if you have memory issues, if you have resource allocation issues, if you have deadlocks going on. If anything is wrong with your environment, it can all be listed there, and it gives a place for you and Microsoft to work together on resolving issues. It's nice to use LCS for deploying to production, because Microsoft will not let you in the new AX public cloud offering. You don't get to touch production. They promise 100% uptime, and for them to guarantee that, nobody touches it but them. This means you can't get to behind the scenes the SQL 2016 Azure database yourself. Visual Studio is not deployed in the production or the high availability test environment. So when you sign up for AX7, you're going to be given, as part of your package, your e-agreement, you're going to get a production environment and you're going to get a high availability test environment. And I think you get one single box environment for like training or something. And then other dev and test environments are deployed in your private Azure subscription. So what Microsoft wants you to do when you're deploying a production environment is you have finished all your user acceptance testing in your test environment. You're going to build a deployment package. You're going to upload it to LCS. That's all the code, security, labels, all that stuff is all in that package. And Microsoft will deploy it to your HA test environment. And then you can retest it there. And if everything passes and it's certified, then you tell Microsoft that deployment package you want to use in production, and you schedule it with them, and they will deploy it in production. Because they're not letting you touch the data directly in that production Azure instance, they're providing several tools to let you do data mining. For example, as of CU1, there's a data entity database, and we'll talk a little bit more about data entities in a few minutes. But we'll talk about it now. The data entities are, essentially, it's a way of packaging data, so that if, for example, if I want to look at customer address information, instead of my having to know all the complex relational tables that are involved in customer contact addresses, the data entity is for customers pulls the customer name, customer address, primary contact, and primary business address by default. So as a user, you don't have to know all the fields and tables that you have to go to pull that data. The other thing data entities do is it provides a structure for inserting and removing data that the entire application now uses, which adds a lot more stability to the application, because no one's inserting data directly into a table or a field without being forced to use a structure that validates data. So if I want to pull data out of the AX SQL database, I can't query it directly. I can, however, take those data entities and select the ones I want to expose through, for example, OData feeds, and then the users can consume the data using an OData feed similar to the way they would have done the old ODBC queries. So I could go in Excel and I can pull up a Power Pivot and say I want to consume an OData feed, and if I had access, then I would see the list of OData feeds, and I could select them, and the data entities make a whole lot more sense to a user querying data than the original table and field structures. The other thing about OData feeds is they are security aware. If a user doesn't have access to see check payment data, it doesn't matter what OData feed they select, they will not get to see it, which I find very nice. We'll talk a little bit about some of the downsides to Azure and some of these tools. But the upside is it's very easy to do Power Query, Power Pivot, Power BI reports against those OData feeds and be confident that the user, through all the ADFS integration, is properly authenticated and cannot get to data they're not allowed to get to. I completely distracted myself. I think what I'm going to go on to is talk a little bit about the environment in terms of doing data integrations, data migrations, and configurations. So on the screen, you can see a quick look at the data import export DIXF form for creating import jobs or export jobs. First, I might as well point out, since I haven't really showed it anywhere else here, this is an AX7 form. the new AX, excuse me. You notice that little next to Dynamics AX, there's this little three lines. Here, I'll put my little thingy there. Those 3 lines. That's now called the hamburger. And if anybody could explain to me why that's called a hamburger, other than I guess it looks a little like a hamburger, that'd be nice to know. But that's the new hamburger, and that's where you click to get your drop-down menus. And it works an awful lot like a thick client. Microsoft has done a very good job, in my opinion, of taking all the functionality required from a thick client and implementing it in a browser-based solution. So it's not like Amazon where you have to constantly click refresh and update your little checkout box. It tends to act very interactive. The users are not having any issues with the interactive nature of the data. You can do things like set favorites. You now have workspaces where Microsoft has taken sets of relevant tasks and created a workspace, and you can assign a workspace to a user. So instead of having to go to 3 different forms to see a set of data elements, a related set of data elements, they can click on the workspace and go there. And we can add workspaces and change them. But this is kind of what the basic Internet Explorer layout looks like. I have my menus, I have my buttons across the top. You'll notice you now have a save option. You can choose to turn on requiring saving. This is related to that dissociation of the client from the data and locking data. You may want to force all of your users to have to hit save to save data as opposed to just going off to a different screen and hoping it got saved without error messages coming back. But yeah, let's move on. This is the data import export job setup form where I can give my job a name, and I can say what type of data I'm importing or exporting, and I pick a data entity. It'll automatically map fields if they're named the same. If not, I can do a source and destination field mapping here. And I can save this job, and I can schedule it to run in batches, and it provides what could be a user interface-based tool for importing and exporting data. Generally recommend against that I would have IT, maybe business analyst level people set this up for you. But once it's very easy to set up. It doesn't take long to do import and export data mapping through DIXF. The files, when they're coming in and out, they have to be on the Azure file service. You can't browse to a local file. Well, when you're actually running the jobs, they have to be on Azure. When I'm setting this up, I can browse to my local drive through the client and upload and download the files. If I want to set this up as a batch job, I have to have my ADFS integration set up. I have to copy files up through Azure. Your IT guys will have to do that for you. There'll be a local file. You drop it in, a local folder, and it'll automatically get moved up to the correct folder in Azure, and then the batch jobs can pick them up. Integration is typically done, at least the way we were implementing it, through web services. Very similar to the old AIF web service development, except that you have to go through data entities. So if there isn't the data entity with the fields you want, or if you've added custom fields to a table, you will have to extend the data entity and then make it available to use for integration. And the first concern we had about this was my experience with web services is they can get slow and have a tendency to trip on themselves if you push them too hard. I will have to say that Microsoft has done a fabulous job implementing this. We're processing tens of thousands of transactions a day, like something over 40, 50,000 transactions a day. A week, 10,000 or so a day, through web services during a 6 to 7 hour stretch each day. And they are running quite well. We are not losing data. And when the interface identifies a data error, there's already a set of tools built in for error logging for you to click in the list and expose all the errors that were returned by the integration. Saves a lot of programming time and having these tools available and having a stable, solid web service platform available for you to use. Your developers will pick it up pretty quickly if they're used to the old AIF integration. It's fairly similar. I have a link on here, kind of 2 points about this. There's a wiki site which has a slew of helpful information about the new AX. It's now open to the public. If you go search for AX Dynamics Wiki Help, you'll come up with this axhelp.dynamics.com English Wiki. You can browse through there at all the documents that have been uploaded to it. But in the specific case of printing and email management, this was a big concern of ours because the server is running off-site, and I want to print to local printers. And around about the month before we were supposed to come live, they implemented this new tool for system administrators that you'll see on the screen here called Download Document Routing Agent Installer, which is a long name for you click this button, you pick the printers you want to upload, and it'll automatically configure them on the server. And if ADFS is integrated properly and the users have access to the printers, it lets you just assign printers to users and provides them options to pick different printers through print management for selected activities like printing checks or printing reports or printing statements. Matter of fact, it was so easy to do that we ran through it once and made sure it works. Then we handed it over to the non-AX expert IT department guys who went through the process, figured it out, and had it deployed in a day. So all the users had their printing set up within about 3 days once the IT guys had figured out how to do it. There is a similar tool for implementing outbound email for example, payment remit to notifications through the print management facility. So it's especially easy if you have Office 365. You put an admin Office 365 account in the setup form and tell it whether you want all of the emails to come from the user who generated them or from a one central admin account or whatever, and voila, email just started working. So I was very happy with how well Microsoft implemented that. I was afraid we were going to have a lot of issues with local printing, restriction of printers like check printers to specific users, and emailing and how we set up the emailing for automated processes. It was actually, I found, easier than the old AX 2012 method of doing it. Finally, we're going to talk a little more. I've covered a lot of this about living with Azure. As I said, you have to have an Azure subscription if you want to deploy your own dev and test environments, and you will. They're template-based, but one thing to remember about it is when you're on your own private Azure subscription, you're paying click fees, and you're also paying storage fees. So if you deploy 5 dev environments, after a couple months, you may only be using 2 of them. You're paying for all 5. So you need to get into a regular cycle with your IT department of monitoring the deployed environments. When was it last used, and is there a justification for maintaining it? Because you do not want to leave environments out there in Azure that don't have an immediate need and an ROI. It's easy enough to redeploy them that if you're not going to use it for a month, my opinion, you should blow it away, decommission it, and rebuild it if you need it. That's not necessarily true with test environments. They need to be out there with a consistent set of data for users to go in and test. Train environments, they need to be pre-built, they need to be stable. But those dev environments, you can pay a lot of money that you're not using, and they're too easy to redeploy and blow away. My recommendation is at least monthly, maybe every 2 weeks, go through and look at your deployed environments. High availability environments, I said they're deployed by Microsoft. You select what type of disaster recovery you want. You work in hand with Microsoft through your EA agreement because it impacts the size of the servers that are deployed. You have a lot of options. You pick, say you're on the East Coast and you're afraid the entire East Coast is going to slide off into the ocean. You want your disaster recovery site to be in the Midwest. I think it's in Colorado. If you have a worldwide or global deployment, Microsoft does have the server facilities, Azure server facilities, and there's several in Europe. There's an Africa-based one. There's several over in the Far East. There's several in Australia. So they have a pretty good geographic distribution through all the continents. I think the ones in China have not been fully deployed yet. I think there's some. I think India and China, there are some data availability, security, like legal issues. But I understand they're supposed to have those worked out soon. But Microsoft handles all the back-end processes for getting your data synced between those, so you can specify which in which geographic location you want to connect to as your primary, and Microsoft will take care of keeping all the data synced between them, which just takes a huge load off us when we're doing deployment, that we don't have to worry about these things. I mentioned file transfer and storage. It is a little harder. You have to have ADFS integration up, and there's some tools you use, some scripts that run that you can schedule to automatically transfer files between your local file store and an Azure file store. Obviously, we run them as often as possible. I think we run about once a minute to transfer files back and forth, so we don't want to have to wait for it. SQL 2016 for Azure. First and most, different people will consider this more or less important. I think it's very important that there are no cubes in the new AX. The new AX 2016 for Azure, as opposed to the type you deploy on your local environment, but the one for Azure uses in-memory indexes, and they are very, very fast. So traditionally, if I had, say, a 50 million row record set with a lot of relations to different tables, and I wanted to write queries against that, I typically would expect to have pretty significant delays in running my queries on a really large data set with a huge Cartesian coordinate join result set. So that's the reason we would build cubes. We'd have to know what our report is going to look like. We'd have to have measures and dimensions set up specific to the report we're going to run. We usually have to call in fairly expensive analysts to come in and figure out exactly how to build our cube. Maybe have to engage a programmer to come in and deploy the cube correctly. It costs a lot of time and money to get it right, so that when the user ran the report and he wanted to pick a certain dimension for his report, it would work. Well, the new 2016 is so fast that I can actually run traditional style queries against those data entities and get back results right away. So we don't deploy cubes anymore. We just write reports the old-fashioned way, as if we only had 20,000 rows of records instead of 50 million. I mentioned that you don't have direct access for queries. You cannot touch the production database directly in any fashion unless you're coming through the application or through like an OData layer. So we now have some options for that. As a CU1 I mentioned, they deployed this thing called a data entity database, where we can select specific data entities and the refresh rate at which it gets copied out to that database. That database is outside that secured layer in the production public cloud, so you can directly access that. Other thing about this is I mentioned replication here. Replication is for disaster recovery purposes only in the 2016 Azure version. You can't pick tables and fields to replicate. You specify the type and frequency of your disaster recovery, and replication supports that. That's how they keep almost near-time or almost real-time replication of your entire data across geographically dispersed host sites. Finally, Excel exports work great. You can now in AX7, I can take a list, I can export it to Excel, I can update the data from a former list in Excel and publish it back to AX. Works really well. Unfortunately, there are some limitations because they've found that pulling data into Excel and pushing it back from Excel in Azure causes some performance hits if the data sets get too large. Right now, there's a 2,000 row limit on that feature, though I understand, actually it may be fixed by now. I understand they were planning on expanding that, and they thought they had addressed the issues that were causing them problems. But at last I tried to use it, I had a 2,000 row limit on it. And the OData feeds, it is still not the perfect solution for exporting 200,000 rows of data that you want to then massage. You run into some performance issues, just like you always have with OData when you start getting over, I think there was an old limit, but now I know you can dump 50 or 60,000 rows, but it starts to really slow down and get cumbersome. So I wouldn't write large data massaging reports using OData. I would plan on using the data entity database and writing reports to run against that. Now, you can always use SSRS to write reports that run against the production database, deploy them. Now you can deploy them into the menu structures in AX, so they look like their native options. Like if the customer statement link is in the menu. Management reporters, now the same way. You can publish management reporter reports back into AX as a menu option and provide security access through roles to it. I'm actually starting to run out of time, so I'm going to mention real quick how this impacts your projects. Um, the analysis I've found probably is a little bit slower than the old process because we really want to use those business process models. What it does is it makes you be very thorough to go through all the impacted processes and document them. So right up front, if we do that through LCS, we've slowed down our analysis cycle, maybe by as much as 50%. The result of that, though, is my design phase of the project tends to speed up quite a bit because I've got a lot more concrete documentation and framework in which we're working. My fit gap documents, my solution design templates, those are all still applicable, like my old templates for solution design, my solutions backlogs. The functionality didn't change. Most of my templates still work exactly as they used to. So I'm now kind of in a high-speed mode when I go through design. Because the Visual Studio development environment is a substantially better environment for doing development, we found our development times have shortened dramatically. Overall, we feel like it's about the same in the long run. We think we probably maybe could deploy 10 to 20% faster in AX, but that's largely going to depend upon the sophistication of your IT department and how much time it's going to take them to get up to ADFS integrations, managing multi-network domains, and some of the issues around cloud-based deployments, getting Office 365 integrated, getting your users set up across all of them. But assuming your IT department's good at that, we feel like it's a little faster to deploy in AX7. We do feel like it's dramatically more stable. We're getting a lot fewer errors. We're also finding that coming out of the TAP programs, that 98+% of the functionality had been addressed, and we were not running into within a month or so of coming live by, say, the beginning of June. We felt like virtually all of the errors had been resolved by Microsoft. They were doing a very good job of turning around reported issues, fixing some performance snafus we were running into, and stabilizing the platform. So as of right now, we're very confident moving forward with the new AX that it's a replacement for AX 2012 in the cloud with all of the functionality and the tools we need to do a deployment. Okay, I have now been talking for 47 minutes, and I think it's probably time to go to Q&A. Jason, we got any questions?
Yeah, we do have some questions starting to come in, and I would invite anyone else who has any to enter them into the Q&A block on the right. First question, can you develop and test locally, then deploy to Azure?
That's a great question. If you are a partner or an ISV developer, you are allowed to deploy the new AX in a local environment. But if you're not a partner with an ISV product that you're trying to get into the approval process, then my understanding is no, you cannot. You have to deploy in an Azure subscription environment. And probably another question that's going to come up is when will there be an on-prem version? I'll go ahead and say right now they expect to announce that next year-ish sometime. We are not really betting on that. They may or they may not. We don't know what the time frame is. It's dependent upon the full Azure stack rolling out. And, they may have selected 3 partners to do that Azure private deployment, but they have not officially announced the time when that's available, and the on-prem version of AX is going to rely upon that. So until they announce when the full Azure stack is available, we're not going to have a date for an on-prem version. I would not expect it in the next 6 months, that's for sure.
Okay, someone in the audience wants to know if it's possible to upgrade to larger VMs down the road, like after you go live, the company grows and needs a larger system in 2020.
Yes, as a matter of fact, even if you know that you expect a volume up, say you purchase a company and you expect to have a large volume of data coming on and new users coming in, and then that volume will drop off. You can coordinate with Microsoft to add resources to your VMs, to your production environment, and take them away. And I don't know what lead time is required for that, but it's on the order of days, not months. And Microsoft will be monitoring your production environment, and if they start to see it getting overloaded, they will contact you about adding resources to it.
Okay, can we create our own data entities?
You can. You can extend existing ones. You can create new ones. You do have to understand the table structures to create them, because what you're doing is essentially creating queries that are then deployed as data entities. And you have the option of deploying them as available for OData feeds or available for use in the by the AX application and or available to replication to the new data entity database.
Okay, a couple of retail-related questions here. First is just, do you have any general experiences with AX for retail, and how is the MPOS working with AX7?
Okay, so this is this is complicated because and I'm not the expert on the retail POS, but I will say that Microsoft has an answer for the need for a retail client to remain up with local inventory if the internet connections go down. So my understanding is you can deploy the retail POS as a standalone, as a locally deployed instance on its own server if you wish. And so if the internet goes down, you still are able to operate. As soon as the internet comes back up, it syncs. And as a matter of fact, you can specify by site whether it is locally maintained or run off the cloud. So you may have a site you're worried about, say in a rural location where you have very inconsistent internet. You would deploy that one as an on-prem POS with local warehouse information, local inventory information. And then if you had a site, say in Atlanta, where you don't worry about it, you can leave that one purely in the cloud. So I don't know if I answered the question, but yes, you can use retail. It is up and running. And Microsoft has a solution for the concerns about local inventory maintenance when the internet goes down, as it will in some sites.
Okay, I want to make a last call for questions here. We have one more. I also want to remind folks to look for a survey on the way out. We really appreciate any feedback you can provide there. So here we go. Is it okay for end users to import data using DIXF where in a situation where, where IT would design the import and end users would run it?
It depends on the end user. I would not let just any user into the DIXF forms, but there are certainly sophisticated users or subject matter experts who, with training, can reliably be allowed in that form. It is security aware. They will not be able to pick, say, for example, a payroll data entity if they don't have access to payroll. The risk is that if they mismap the data coming in, then you're going to have a much larger effort of backing out what they did wrong. But it is available for end users to use if they are subject matter experts and sophisticated end users who you can trust to map data. If they want to add a new spreadsheet, they want to add a param, well, I don't know, whatever. If they want to add a field to a journal ledger, for example, a general ledger journal entry, and import their own new format. You can do that. It's just understanding that if they make a mistake, it then becomes very difficult to back out.
Okay, and someone's wondering, are there any B2C companies on AX7 yet?
There are, off the top of my head. I'm not gonna know who they are, but there are definitely some out there. And by B2C, do we mean retail or e-commerce? So if the person who asked the question is still on, they're welcome to email or call us, and we will get references for them. Even if we don't have the specific industry in our client base, we will go back to Microsoft and get names or references and forward it to them.
Okay, yeah, and retail or e-commerce were two of the scenarios they were thinking of.
Right. Yeah. I'm pretty confident there are. I have heard of some, but I don't want to swear to that. So I think we're better off if I go ahead and email in the question so I know who to return to, and I will go to one of the Microsoft Sales Channel guys, SSP guys, and get a specific reference. One thing, if anybody's still on, one thing you should be aware of that I didn't mention, I should have, there is no upgrade path yet. Hopefully we're getting one in the next few weeks, but my understanding is the delay is on figuring out how to price the perpetual license you get with AX 2012 and convert that to a monthly subscription license. And while the upgrade tool has been developed by Sonata and delivered and tested, the actual ability, they'll open a TAP program, which they haven't yet, and that TAP program, they'll take in 10, 15 or so customers who want to do an upgrade, and then they will, once that TAP program is approaching the end and they're confident that the upgrade process is nailed down, then they will open it for the public. But the first step appears to be understanding the pricing model change and figuring out how they're going to socialize that price and then open the TAP program. So I meant to mention that earlier.
All right. How difficult is it to develop features in AX that don't write to an AX table but may query them?
It's not difficult at all. As a matter of fact, if you want to deploy forms using your AX environment that look like they're part of AX but have nothing to do with the data structures in the traditional AX tables, you can create tables, create fields, create data entities for them, build your own projects, create forms, hook them into menus, and deploy them. You can write all the new table structures you want. So I think that answered the question.
Okay. Another DIXF question. Can end users run a specific DIXF entity on their own and when they want, for example, a payroll export?
Yes, they can. Part of that user import, user interface allows them to go in and select an existing job and just run it if they want. We would normally recommend that an analyst set that up and schedule it. Like, for example, give them a folder where they can drop a spreadsheet, and so once the DIXF job is written, then I put it in a batch job, schedule it, maybe run it every 5 minutes, hook it up to a folder, set up a script so the user drops their spreadsheet into a local folder, the script copies it up to Azure, and the batch job picks it up and loads it every few minutes. So it seems to me a little safer. But yes, you can do it as a one-off if you want.
Does it make sense for an existing AX 2012 R2 user to start researching upgrading?
So the primary question is the return on investment. So if you want to get out of the model of maintaining my own servers and my people to support those servers, sunsetting those servers and replacing them on a regular schedule so that you have consistency within your disaster recovery plan. And you can't let a server get 5 years old and expect to keep the same DR plan. And pay for perpetual licensing and regular renewals of your service agreements so that you get the upgrades and you maintain compliance with Microsoft in case you have an outage issue and need service. That's one model. The totally different model for the cloud base. You're paying per month per user, and Microsoft handles all the hardware. You don't care if a server's old. You would expect it'll never be old. Microsoft's supposed to replace them. You don't need infrastructure guys. You don't need procurement guys to buy your equipment. All of that stuff is handled by Microsoft. You're as long as you pay your bill, and you can make arrangements for Microsoft to lower your fees and pay out 3 years if you want. But as long as you pay your bill, it's like a cell phone. It's just going to keep working. So you're no longer going to get the random $300,000 bill from your partner because we have to apply this big upgrade to keep you compliant. It's just I know how much I'm going to pay every month, and here's how much it is. At least at Mansfield, when they did their business cost assessment, they found that it was a true lower cost fairly quickly to use the Azure subscription-based, the public cloud pricing, was actually a lower total cost than if they were to either host it or keep all the servers on-prem. That solution, it may not be the same. It's going to depend on the number of users and transaction volumes. But the typical list price for AX right now is $185 per user per month. So right now, I believe they're somewhat negotiable on that. We have worked out lower deals for certain clients going to the new AX. I don't know how long Microsoft will remain willing to discount those prices, but your total cost of ownership For the things we looked at, it was equivalent or lower to go to the cloud. So the real decision became, do I need it on-prem? Do I need control of my data? Do I want to be completely in control of my environment and have a perpetual license? Or do I want someone else to maintain it and have a subscription-based license, a phone-type license? So, and once again, I don't know if I answered the question, but hopefully I did.
Okay, any challenges with initial data migration? We hear that the templates used in 2012 cannot be used in with AX7.
The reason the templates can't be used is the data entities are not the same as the data tables. So the data entities are designed to make it simpler, but it means that your old templates won't work anymore. However, it is not difficult to either select an existing data entity or to extend a data entity or create a new one, and from scratch if you want, create a data entity that matches the templates you have. So I would not, we found that the data migration to the new AX was very similar to the old data migration process. The real issue is always in the data, not in the tool.
Okay, and our last question, when a hotfix is made by Microsoft, do you have the choice of whether you want to deploy it or not, or is it pushed without you even knowing it?
Absolutely. Microsoft expects you to choose the hotfix you want, deploy it in your test environment, and test it, and tell them whether or not it's ready for you to deploy. They will not deploy anything from them or from you that has not gone through a change management process that includes building a deployment package, deploying it to HA test, regression testing it with user acceptance, and then that deployment package is then made available through LCS to production.
Okay, well, that concludes our Q&A, so we will begin wrapping up here. Charles, thanks so much for taking the time today to present and answer so many questions for our audience.
You're welcome. Thanks. That was fun. Anybody is welcome to email me. If I don't know the answer, which happens a lot, I will find the person with the answer and get back to you.
All right, great. And we did record today's event. We'll be making that available soon to all of you as well. So thanks again, and have a great day.